Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the greatest rock and roll stories in the universe, all from the fans' perspective. It's Rock Stories with the Brummster. Now, here's the host of the show, my rockin' daddy, the Brummster.
And that's with two M's. If you see one M, get out of Dodge. What's happening, the Brummster here? Rock Stories with the Brummster at the Brummster Spotify channel also as well. Get the app today. The Central Valley and all around the world's rock station, Rock Radio 559. Get the app today, Rock Radio 559. Sundays at 11 a.m. The Brummster does Rock Stories with the Brummster there, and we enjoy hanging out with our guest. We've got an awesome guest today, a friend of the Brummster, an FOB, someone that I knew from years ago in my early rock and roll career at KJFX, Fresno's Classic Rock, 95.7 The Fox. And the Brummster got his start there. And this guy was actually, I thought he was like, wow, I can't believe this guy works down in Bakersfield. He works in Fresno. He works all over. He's got all these stations, and he set up this awesome radio college. And I'm like, oh, cool. And then we maintained our friendship all these years later doing another show I do about batteries with iHeartMedia. And he was on board with helping me to get everything produced and on the air. And the guy is a class act, a friend of the Brummster and FOB. Welcome to Rock Stories with the Brummster, real rock stories from the fans' perspective. And being in radio, my guest today, just like me, has had an opportunity. I just mentioned this off the air to him. Chris Squires with us today. Chris, I just mentioned it off the air. Being in radio has afforded us some special opportunities that most folks don't get when it comes to some of these rock stories, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're really blessed to meet some of the people that we've met and experience some of the things that we have. And it's been, when you sit there, it's funny because it's like, my son and I would joke about, yeah, front row, but what? No backstage pass? and it's like, no, come on now. We've been really fortunate to experience a lot of great things in the world of rock and roll.
You ain't lying. Oh, yeah, we've been spoiled, Chris Squires. Oh, one of my mentors, Chris, when I saw you walk into the studio where we record and produced the battery show that I also do on another realm, and I saw you as the new guy coming in. I'm like, this can't be. Are you serious? Chris Squires, my old operations manager from the Fox. No way, man. My biggest recollection before we get into the cool rock memories and rock stories here, Rock Stories with the Brummster at the Brummster Spotify channel and Rock Radio 559, folks. Chris Squires with us. He was one of my first big bosses, and he set up this awesome radio college. We all drove out to the coast, and you set up this like room where there were a cool hotel and everything. It was like we were on some sort of vacation, and we got to really dig in and really learn, how to take it to another level. And I think that's what you were trying to do for us, right?
Correct. My compatriot DC Carter, every year the company would have us budget for like going to a convention back when radio conventions were a big deal and all that. And we decided, why don't we take that money and use that to help the disc jockeys, give them a chance to grow and an opportunity. And so we brought in Dan O'Day, who's a very smart radio guy. He sees things from 30,000 feet, and it was I mean, even I learned a lot being in that session with him, and I thought it was good for the staff, it was good for morale, and it helped our radio station sound better because we had a pro coaching our folks and showing them the right way to do things.
Yes, and your jocks that you had full time, even prior to me coming on full time, I was able to work in the tutelage of Dave Campbell. I was able to work in the tutelage of Doug Ray. I was able to work in the tutelage of Bruce Campbell, Angie Good, some of the best, the Reverend, some of the best in the radio business came out of little old Fresno, California. I mean, Fresno's got a radio past. Again, we haven't even touched the surface on some of our rock stories today, but we've got a cool conversation going, and I want to keep it headed that direction. Fresno, Casey Kasem, didn't he work in Fresno at one time too? I mean, radio, little old Fresno's had some little gems, haven't we?
Well, you see the back in the 60s when the Boss Radio craze came out, that actually started here in Fresno at, I think it was 1340 KMAK. And then it also ended up being over at 1300 Kino. But the station that I grew up with, which I used to listen to KHJ in Los Angeles and then locally in Bakersfield, KAFY, they all copied this Boss Radio format, and people like Robert W. Morgan and Gary Mack and many of these DJs that I looked up to when I was in high school, they all kicked it off here in Fresno. So Fresno's got a great radio history and broadcasting history.
Yeah, and one thing I remember about your team, and it must be just an example from leading from the top, your team always had a habit of being helpful to the other teammates, whereas I've worked at other radio stations and the DJs are all competitive with each other. There's always a little bit of competitiveness going on. I want to have the better ratings or what have you, just like someone on a sports team. I want to have more rebounds or whatever it might be, receptions or tackles or whatever it might be. It's no different in the radio business, and we're all human beings as well. But I noticed that we were able to kind of put that aside, and it was the bigger picture. We were like a family. Back then you didn't have automation, and so if you needed to go to the restroom, you need that other DJ to go hit a cart and then another song for your break and a sweeper so that you could go do what you've got to do, and vice versa. We were a real team, man. That team spirit in radio, right?
Right. When I first came to Fresno from Bakersfield, I want to say that was like 2001, and I'd worked on and off with some of the people up here before I actually moved up here. But the one thing that when I came into the building at the Fox in New Rock, I sat there and went, "These people are family. Don't mess that up." And because there was just this vibe in the building, like you're talking about, teammates, everybody helping everybody out. Sure, there was a spirit of competition, but not cutthroat competition. And again, everybody was a family. They would go to movies. They'd have barbecues together. They'd go out to lunch or have a drink after work. And that's something that you can't program or you can't force. It was there.
Right. It was organic. It just happened. You're absolutely right. You cannot force that. It either is there or it isn't there. Wow. Yeah. Well said. Well said. Chris Squires with us, Rock Stories with the Brummster on the Spotify channel, Brummster Spotify channel. That's with 2 M's, by the way. And also as well at Rock Radio 559. Get the app today. Rock Radio 559, man. Right on. Well, I'm so glad that you came on the show today. It's been so long since we've chatted last. We're radio brothers from another mother. And you've got a lot of cool memories. And we were talking about some of those cool memories that as radio folks we're afforded that most folks don't have an opportunity to experience in their lives. Like, the backstage joke, seriously, we're like Wayne's World. We always had a pass, man. I mean, getting up on, some of the people you've got to meet. I was telling my wife, Laura, I'm like, I wish I would have met Gwen Stefani. She was just down the hall at New Rock with my friends down there, Robin Lewis and the Reverend, and I didn't have a chance to go meet her. But when No Doubt was in town, did you have a chance to meet them at some time, either with Crab or with New Rock?
Well, here's my story about Gwen Stefani. don't recall meeting her, but we did get to see a dress rehearsal just before they went out on the road. They did a dress rehearsal, like their whole concert, to make sure that the flash pot would fire off at the right time and the sound mix. But it was at the Olympic Auditorium in Los Angeles. And as a kid, wrestling from the Olympic Auditorium, we used to watch that on Wednesday nights on Channel 5. And I'm sitting there going like, I get to see No Doubt dress rehearsal at the Olympic Auditorium. And that just, I was like, and I took my daughter, she was 12 or 13 at the time, and we went to see that. And I don't recall if the record person brought them up later and we got to meet them, but just the fact that there's so much history in that auditorium, and it's rock and roll. It's alternative rock and roll. The two things that I was really into combining in that moment. It was pretty cool. It was like, wow. So that's my Gwen Stefani story.
Oh, wow. Wow. Olympic Stadium. Wow. The ambiance in that place, right?
I'm sorry, what was that?
The ambiance in that place.
Oh, yeah. I mean, again, it reeks of boxing and professional wrestling history, and that's why I was so knocked out by the fact that we get to watch this cool band in this iconic arena. That when I was a kid, I never got to go there as a child, but to be able to go there as an adult, it's like, that's pretty cool.
And I don't know about you, but being in radio and getting to meet so many famous people, I remember the times, I remember the memories, but you get a little callous to it being, we're spoiled a little bit, right? It happened a lot, and so you kind of get used to it happening. I know this sounds sad. It's like getting a swimming pool. When once you get a swimming pool, you're just used to having one, right? I mean, but forgive me, we kind of had that semi-fame that we were shared off of this whole world that we were a part of, and so we were never really starstruck. But have you ever been starstruck? I know I was when I finally interviewed Ted Nugent and introduced him and had that opportunity and met him backstage as well. I was a little starstruck there just because, I'd always wanted to meet Ted, but overall, most acts did not starstruck me, even though I had some other pretty cool opportunities as well. How about you?
You know what? I don't want to say I was ever starstruck, because I was always trying to be conscious of being respectful to them and being, because tonight they're in Fresno, tomorrow night they're in San Jose, then they're in Portland, and they're going to go through this routine every night. So I never really wanted to. I was always respectful of their time and polite, and I think that's the key to those folks. Because you know what, I saw Dave Grohl at a farmer's market in Studio City. Here's my starstruck moment. I saw him because to me, he was like the Paul McCartney of the alternative world. I just love that guy. And for a moment, I was like, and then I went, he's there holding his kid and they're buying tomatoes or whatever, right? And it's like, it's his day off. He doesn't want to be a rock star today. You're in that world, and that could happen. But I backed off and left him alone because it was his day off. It wasn't his day to be a rock star. But yeah, I was like, I was at that point, but I wanted to respect him and his family.
You didn't shadow shop at all. You didn't follow him around the corner. Oh my God, Dave Grohl touched this cereal, man. I'm buying that box. He grabbed it and put it back. I need the Dave Grohl Cheerios, man.
No, what the record person did, she goes, stand right here, I'll take a picture, and he'll be in the background. Not awesome. Like he was looking at me or we were posing. It was just like, and I don't even know, I don't know if she still has that picture. That was like 25 or 20 years ago. But the point being, it was like that, well, at least you could show everybody that he was there. But again, it's like, I just felt like, dude, he's shopping for lettuce. Leave him alone. but I was starstruck.
My Aunt Sue and her friends, Fans on the Run, they go and see Paul McCartney all around the world. And the founder, Rick Glover, has seen Paul McCartney maybe thousands of times. And then now my Aunt Sue's like 118 times or something crazy like that. Like, seriously, these people like just cash in all their chips for Paul. I kid you not. They love Paul McCartney, and hey, if that's what floats your boat, right? But it's quite a love of Paul McCartney. And when I've talked with any of these folks, they all have a common theme, and that is this guy was a Beatle. And I don't think that people realize, I mean, you're talking about Dave Grohl. Paul McCartney's now a friend of Dave's, comes over, has pizza, plays piano with his kid. I mean, they're buddies. They play together, stuff like that. How big and influential Paul McCartney and the Beatles were on all the rock and roll that came decades after, right?
Right, and I remember seeing him at it wasn't the Whiskey, but it was some place. I think it was the Hard Rock on either Sunset or I guess it was Sunset Boulevard, and it was like this special deal where he was performing his new album or something like that. But there wasn't a meet and greet. And I was just like, gosh, I so wanted to meet a Beatle. You know what I mean? Kind of like what you're talking about because of his influence and stuff like that. But we wouldn't have what we have today if it wasn't for the Beatles. I grew up in that era. I grew up going from Bobby V and Del Shannon to, the Beatles, Jimi Hendrix, and Led Zeppelin. I mean, music really changed, but the Beatles that was the, what do I want to say, tipping point? When maybe you want to say when rock became not just music, but an art form in many different ways.
Yeah, because albums back then were not designed like they are now, where it's all just kicking out a single, kicking out a video, kicking out a single, kicking out a TikTok. Back then, it was all about putting out your album, and your album was one big story usually. Your album was one continuous thought, right?
Correct. I mean, back in the day, it used to be, albums were $2 for the mono version and $3 for the stereo version, and they were, anywhere from 10 to 12 songs. But then when the Beatles came out with Sgt. Pepper, that was a story, and that was different. And no longer are you doing, here's 3 leftover songs so we can put that on this album. And I think the other thing too is I was reading something about the Beatles, and it seems to me like they were at one time they were putting out an album every 6 months, and then when that that line in the sand when Sgt. Pepper came along, and rock became more of an art form. The every 6 month thing, that went away because people were spending more time being creative and again making their music more of an art other than just it's another silly pop song.
And the budgets were getting much larger, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, and maybe much to the chagrin of the record companies. There is a story about the Byrds and Mr. Tambourine Man, and they kept spending money, and the Columbia's going, when are we going to get a song? When are we going to get a song? Finally, they hired the Wrecking Crew, the studio musicians that were on a lot of like the Beach Boys and Jan and Dean and a lot of the pop hits from those days. Glenn Campbell was in there. Leon Russell was in there. Hal Blaine's a famous drummer. Finally, they sat there and they hired the Wrecking Crew to play the music for Mr. Tambourine Man. The Byrds sang it, and then I think Roger McGuinn got to play the 12-string guitar. But they were so tired of, we need something, they hired the band, and eventually the Byrds became good musicians. But initially it's like, you guys are holding things up and you're costing us money.
Oh, man, and that was a lot of money back then just to be pissing down the drain,
Yeah, so if when you listen to Mr. Tambourine Man, every time it comes on the radio or on my app, I'll sit there and go, they didn't play the music on this one.
Bird's eye view. All the cool things that, we've had an opportunity to learn in radio about rock and roll. Casually listening, you pick up this or that, you go buy the record, you get into a band. But when you're on the other side of the curtain with the radio crew, back in the day, the radio crew was the portal by which all artists met their listener or their customer, right? That's the lifeblood of music ran through the radio station. I don't know if the pendulum is kind of swinging back that direction with technology making it put more in the hands of more people. I don't know how that's looking, but wow, radio really was the gateway by which rock and roll was able to get out to the masses, huh?
Correct. The thing is with the radio was just at one time, you could almost say was a big a star as the songs that they were playing. I mean, I'm not trying to say that Kino was the equivalent of the Beatles, but if it weren't for Kino, maybe there wouldn't be any Beatles. And if it wasn't for Robert W. Morgan being on Kino or on KMAK, saying, hey, here's a great song, maybe that would have never happened. We will never know that. But the point being, the disc jockeys were personalities, and they were as big a stars as the records they were playing. And we've kind of lost that. The other thing that the disc jockeys did would be, here's a great new song. They'd be excited about the music they were playing. Where nowadays it's kind of like, well, the songs come on and somebody's going to tell you a tidbit in 7 minutes after we hear this from so-and-so. The energy and the excitement back in the 60s and early 70s radio. I don't know if we would have had that kind of excitement about the music if the disc jockeys weren't there to push that.
Oh, you're serious. You're absolutely right. Seriously right. It's so true. The DJ was of importance. The DJ, I know, as here as a DJ, we all think we're important, right?
But it gets back to that's why now I'm doing talk radio instead of music radio. And why do you listen to talk radio? You listen for the personalities and what they have to say. So it's almost like, I don't want to say what goes around comes around, but when I was a kid listening to Robert W. Morgan and the Real Don Steele, to hear them now in talk radio, I listen to Glenn Beck or Clay and Buck to hear them. So it's kind of, like I said, what goes around kind of comes around.
Oh, man, exactly. The personality. Bringing the personality back to radio. Get the app, folks, online, Rock Radio 559. Just go to the Google App Store or Apple App Store and type in Rock Radio 559. Home of Hopper in the Morning, the Brummster, and Brian K. Martinez. Rock Radio 559 here on Rock Stories with the Brummster with my friend, FOB, friend of the Brummster, FOTB, actually, if you want to put the in there. But hey, I just figured a fob sounded cool, right? FOB, Chris Squires. Like Chris, you really were just such a positive influence on my career. That last year and a half when I was at the Fox, I really came into my own, and Spotman had me as the flagship jock, and you just let it go. You just said, you know what, I'm not going to micromanage, and I like this guy. You just let me stay there. And I grew so much in just that year and a half because of that. And you to get back to the personality, we need more personality back in radio again. And you're talking about talk radio, having that personality, but music radio, it's missing it. Everything being voice tracked and everything nowadays, right? Oh, we got an 18-year-old from college, never done an air check in his life. When I got on the air, I had to do board operate, obviously no automation, board operate overnight at KSEQ, and I had to get everything ready for the morning show for Hopper. And I had to go in between songs before we had dead air and make a fake tape in my overnight and take that in and do air checks for a couple of months before I even got on the air. And nowadays they just put whoever on the air. I mean, you know that by listening to radio these days, just generally, huh?
Well, I think one of the things that we are need to look at as an industry is we, you and I grew up with whether it's Casey Kasem or B. Mitchell Reed on KMET or Jim Ladd, and whoever these personalities that influenced us in our career. I think that, and that's what made us want to get in radio. Right now, it's like there's not a lot of excitement for people to get in the radio. When I was in San Diego, we had some kids. There was a college station down there, an AM station, and those kids wanted to be on the radio. So they would come looking to, when I worked at Salem, they come to us and want to get a job, and that's kind of missing out. It's interesting though. One of the young ladies I met, she ended up being our receptionist, but it's like, well, you're 20 something. Well, why do you want to work in radio? Oh, I think it's cool. I was like, really? Because of all the technology and everything. But I think that's the thing is we've got to get people excited. And I think what you do, like with your show, with when you talk to people about rock and roll and their experiences and stuff like that, you have that personality, and hopefully someone's going to hear you and go, hey, I like him. I want to be like him, or that's what I want to do. Because we all had that moment. Mine was, I think I was 12 years old listening to Cafe 55, and I'm going like, that's what I want to do. Now, maybe if that was a good career choice or not, I don't know. But I remember in my head, that's what I wanted to do. But what's interesting is I didn't become a disc jockey per se, or the world's greatest disc jockey. I became a businessman that runs radio stations.
Right.
Which wasn't my thought when I was 12.
Right. That just happened to be the business you got in, and you ended up loving, the business that you got in. And still to this day, you love the business. But just to jump back for a quick second, I remember those hoops that you had to go through to prove yourself before you got put on the air. And nowadays, I hear people that just get put on the air and they're voice tracking 8 stations, and they're just title artists in, out, and I'm thinking to myself, this isn't right. You could add a little bit of personality in there. You could get some coaching going on for some of these people. So, before you put them on the air, and have them go through some of those roadblocks so that they can learn and get better, and then you put them on the air. It feels to me that the threshold, now that I guess anybody can go on the air with YouTube, the threshold's a little lower. But as a broadcaster, you and I, there's a higher bar. Once you put it out there, it's out there. It's FCC. It's a whole nother level. And so we want formatics to be right. I'm speaking from a program director standpoint. Put that cap on. We want formatics to be, a certain way. And I hear it generally speaking, just on not, picking on anybody, but I've heard it where it's just like, wow, who put this guy on the air? Or who put this lady on the air? Are they even listening to their own station? I mean, I'm not trying to be negative. I'm just being like, wow, I want to see radio get that gravitas back, that when you're on the air, you earned it, that you went through the hoops, and those hoops just don't seem to be there anymore like it used to.
Well, I think, not to sound like my dad or whatever, but it all started going to hell in a handbasket when you didn't have to take an FCC test to get a license. We had, first class license is what you had to have to operate at a station with more than one tower. And I had a third class license with endorsement, and that allowed me to operate a AM station with one tower, or a FM station. But you had to take a test. You had to, pass the test. You had to study for it. And then in fact, I still have it right here. I've got this. Here's this little card thing I filled out back in 1983. This is my restricted radio telephone operator permit. And all I had to do was send in $3.
Oh, that is so cool, Chris. That is so cool. You still have it? Oh, rad.
I wish I could somewhere. I think I actually have my third class permit that I had in high school where I had to take a test and all that kind of stuff. But the point being, we had to kind of know a little bit of stuff. And nowadays you don't need to have, you don't have to have a license to operate a radio station. So, and that was the thing back in the day.
Well, nowadays you come in and there's a computer screen, a touch screen, and it's working on automatic and it's got everything loaded and they just have to press a button and then record real quick and then it plugs it in there. Back in the day, we come in and there were carts, there were for every sounder, there were CDs and there were tapes flying. You had vinyl going at early stages and like just all this going on because if you didn't play something, a cart or some music or a collar on the tape that you had to splice with a razor blade. And I mean, walking uphill and snow both ways, Chris. We really did real radio, man. We didn't have a computer screen. We had to juggle 5 things at once, right?
Right, and I think that, because when I first came to Fresno, we were still playing carts and stuff, and then we started bringing in some of the computer stuff. But the thing that always kind of that we needed to do as managers, and we did this up in Sacramento when I worked for Salem up there, and if you're going to use the automation to record a show and be done in 15 minutes, that's really the wrong thought process. I think you need to do your show prep just like you would if you were on the air live. And one of the things that we did with the disc jockeys in Sacramento is they recorded maybe a break or two ahead, but they were still in the studio. They were answering phones. They were interacting with the audience, and they were keeping up on any breaking news and stuff like that. So it wasn't a knock it out and, I want to go get a coffee. It was, you still had to be in the radio station. We were taking advantage of some of the technology, but at the end of the day, it's all about companionship and being a friend to that listener. And that's what we were trying to do up there, is still have that DJ in the room and that, when I say warm and fuzzy, I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, because people call the radio station to connect, to want to chat, to maybe share their heart or tell you how much they liked a song they heard or something you said. And that's kind of what has kind of gone away.
Right, the community aspect of it. The community is really what radio was all about, and that the FCC, you need someone there. What if all of a sudden there's an emergency and you need someone at the radio station? These airwaves are not just for our entertainment, but also in the event of a national emergency, they're vital to our country's survival, right?
Correct. Yeah, we still have we still run the EAS tests. We're still required to do that weekly on all our radio stations to make sure that's, and I know people probably think it's irritating and all that, but that's part of our commitment to the community. We need to let people know when there's something that affects their lives and to tune, where to get the right information that they need. So, still a very vital part.
Yeah, someday, your Google's not working. What's up? The phone's not working. My Google's not working. Oh, crap, what happened? And then all of a sudden, where do you go? You go to your AM or your FM radio and you start scanning to try to find out what the heck's going on. Because in the event that something happens, there's some backup, if you will, for a certain extent.
It's interesting that you should mention that, because when I was working in Bakersfield at American General Media back in the early 2000s, and something happened with the internet. The internet went down, and and it's like on my desk was my good old-fashioned AM radio that all I had to do was turn it on, find the station, bring up the volume. I think I actually made a Facebook post about that, where it's like, it's always there. It's if something's happening, you can go out to your car and tune in a station, or if you have a table radio or whatever. I mean, the point is, it's pretty darn reliable because you don't have to rely on an internet connection or whatever, fiber line or whatever we use, a cable to get it to your house or your modem or your router. The radio's always on.
Yeah. And that's what it's designed for. And then in addition, radio airwaves have been used over the years to carry voices and music and just lots of camaraderie. That relationship between the listener and the station, the DJs and the listener, was also the gateway to all this great rock and roll and these awesome rock stories and rock memories that we're talking about. Chris Squires, thank you so much for being on the show today, man. And I so appreciate you and the fact that all these years later, several decades later, we're still in each other's lives, man. Chris, thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Chris Squires, thanks, brother. Rock Stories with the Brummster. Hang on the line for our engineers. We have an opportunity to enjoy every single day that is before us. We have a choice. We can look at it and say, wow, there's war going on. There's all, or we can say, you know what? I'm going to look for the good things in life and good friendship. That guy's one of them. Definitely an FOB, a friend of the Brummster, Chris Squires, today on Rock Stories with the Brummster, living vicariously through our fans and their perspectives on the show, telling stories that we wouldn't know otherwise that have happened, and especially some of the friends of the Brummster that have been in the radio industry that have the ability and all of the blessings, if you will, to have a chance to meet some of these cool stars and some of the stories that we heard today. Continuing on, if you want to hear Rock Stories with the Brummster, Sundays at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, Rock Stories with the Brummster on Rock Radio 559. Get the app, Rock Radio 559, also as well at the Brummster Spotify channel. Check out also Today in Rock History with the Brummster YouTube channel every single day for free. Today in Rock History. Like our videos and subscribe. Thanks for listening today and always. From the Brummster with 2 M's, rock on. Rock Stories with the Brummster.